Serial killers often hide behind impeccable social masks. This was the case with Herbert Baumeister, a man who ran respected charity shops by day and hunted and killed young gay men in his mansion by night. The case of the Indianapolis disappearances of the 1990s revealed how prejudice, police neglect, and social appearances can create the perfect environment for a killer to operate for years without being detected. The story I'm going to tell today shows how even a successful businessman and family man can hide macabre secrets in the back of his property. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now is the time. Click the subscribe button and activate the bell to receive notifications of new cases like this. Each like helps us continue to bring you real stories of crimes that shocked the world. Herbert Richard Baumeister was born on April 7, 1947, to physician Herbert and Elizabeth Baumeister in the Indiana area of the United States. In addition to Herbert, his parents had 3 more children, Barbara, Brad, and Richard. His father was a talented anesthesiologist who provided the family with a luxurious life, and at some point, they moved to Washington District, Indiana. From a very early age, Herbert demonstrated unusual characteristics for a child. Donovan, a close friend from school, reported disturbing behavior. Herbert had a habit of wanting to taste human urine and would often collect dead birds from the side of the road to examine during class. His parents began to notice something was wrong when young Herbert began to impulsively set arson attacks. This led to mental health tests, where he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. However, there is no record of any treatment being provided or proper follow-up. At school, Herbert tried to join sports groups, but his studious and reserved personality did not fit well in these environments, which seemed to frustrate him. Over time, he began to isolate himself, rejecting anyone around him, becoming a lonely, young man who never tried to make friends or meet girls. In 1965, at the age of 18, Herbert began his studies at Indiana University, but he clearly did not know what he was doing there, and dropped out after his first year. He returned in 1967, and in 1972 he entered Butler University, where he remained for only 1 semester. Due to his father's influence, he was able to get a job at the city's leading newspaper, the Indianapolis Star. Herbert was motivated, thinking that he could grow up to be someone influential. However, his eccentric behavior soon proved to be problematic. Harry Dona, a former advertising executive at the newspaper, recounted an incident in which Herbert offered to drive co-workers to a football game but showed up driving a hearse obtained from the hospital where his father worked. Herbert was amused to see people step aside in the road as he passed, while his co-workers wondered about the man's sanity. It wasn't long before he was fired from the newspaper. His father found him another job, this time in the motor vehicle department. His co-workers noticed that despite his quirky personality, Herbert was very intelligent, which earned him a promotion to programming director. His antics, however, continued. At Christmas, he gave his colleagues a card with a picture of him and another man dressed as women. His antics became increasingly inappropriate, culminating in him urinating on his boss's desk, which, surprisingly, did not result in his immediate dismissal. At some point, Herbert was introduced to Julie Sater by a mutual friend. They both shared a dream of starting their own business. Julie fell in love with Herbert, attracted by his light hair and kind face. They began dating, and, in November of 1971, they were married in a beautiful ceremony in Indianapolis. Herbert earned a good salary in the department where he worked, while Julie was a high school journalism teacher. She soon left her job to devote herself to her future family. In 1979, the couple had little Mary, followed by Eric in 1981. Life seemed to be going well until Herbert, in yet another one of his pranks, urinated on his boss's desk again, this time hitting a letter addressed to the governor of Indiana. This resulted in his dismissal and forced Julie to return to teaching, to support her family. At his new job at a thrift store, Herbert realized the financial potential of this type of business. He shared his observations with Julie, and after 3 years, they decided to invest their savings in their own store. With $4,000 borrowed from Herbert's mother, they opened Save-A-Lot in partnership with the Indianapolis Children's Department, a local charity. The store soon became popular with low-income families. The couple was praised by the Children's Department, as part of the profits were donated to help underprivileged children. The business prospered so much that after the first year, they had already made over $50,000 in sales, allowing them to open a second store. Building on their success, the couple had a third daughter, Emily. and decided to move to an upper-middle-class home in the upscale Westfield district, 20 miles from Indianapolis. They purchased a mansion known as Fox Hollow Farms, with 40 acres, an indoor pool, 4 bedrooms, and a stable, everything Julie had ever dreamed of. After the move, it wasn't long before tensions began to arise. Herbert was bossy and always had the last word in arguments, making Julie feel overshadowed. This resulted in periods of coldness and distance between the couple. Neighbors and business associates who visited Fox Hollow noticed the tense atmosphere there. Herbert neglected the property, allowing weeds to grow unchecked across the 18 acres. The mansion looked abandoned, without order or care. Julie often took the children to visit Herbert's mother, Grandma Baumeister, at the condominium on Lake Cicero. Herbert began to show signs of discomfort with his mother-in-law. Marital problems grew worse, and Julie grew increasingly tired of the relationship. According to Julie, during their entire marriage, the couple had had sex no more than 5 times. She reported that Herbert was ashamed of his thin body, always going to bed in his pajamas, and when something happened, it was under the sheets. Detective Virgil Vandegrift, who would later investigate the case, said that these were warning signs that Herbert was up to something wrong. They were signs of danger and disorder, but he understood that Julie was a woman who, despite her problems, loved her husband and tolerated him. In 1994, the couple's son, Eric, was playing in the backyard when he found something among the leaves and mud. As he approached it, he realized that it looked like a human skull. Frightened, he took his discovery to his mother, who was horrified, to discover that it was a human skeleton. When Herbert came home from the store, Julie questioned him. He dramatically explained that it was one of his doctor father's dissection skeletons, which he had found in the garage and decided to bury in the backyard after cleaning. Julie ended up believing the story, without realizing that the remains were those of one of her husband's victims. Unknown to his family, Herbert Baumeister was already wanted by authorities as the Interstate 70 Strangler, and from that moment on, he would begin to accumulate victims in his new territory in Indianapolis. Private Detective Virgil Vandegrift was well respected in the Indianapolis area. His investigation firm operated 24 hours a day and had a reputation for solving cases, especially missing persons cases. At that time, city police would only start looking for missing people after 24 hours, and if they didn't find someone within 30 days, the case would be transferred to the Missing Persons Department. Those who didn't want to wait through all that red tape would turn to Detective Virgil. His first case relevant to this story was that of 28-year-old Alan Brosat in early 1994. The boy's mother came to the detective saying that her son, a regular at the Gay Bar Brothers, had gone missing. Vandegrift put up posters and began a search, initially believing that Alan might have simply moved without warning, a common occurrence in that area. What worried Vandegrift was the discovery that 3 other similar disappearances had occurred over the years. His investigations pointed to the year 1993, when Jack Jones, aged 31, and with a profile similar to Alan, disappeared without a trace after frequenting gay bars in the area. In July 1994, 34-year-old Roger Allen Goodlett also disappeared after leaving his home to go to a gay bar. Virgil noticed the same pattern, the same age range and lifestyle as the other missing people. The detective and his investigator Bill Isley scoured bars in search of clues, but faced difficulties as many of the patrons desired privacy and were reluctant to provide information. They did discover that Roger had last been seen with another man. Vandegrift reported his findings to the police, who were uninterested. In August of 1994, a man named Tony Harris came to Vandegrift's office with a story that the police had dismissed as the ravings of a crazy drug addict. Tony said he was in a gay bar in Indianapolis when he noticed a tall man looking closely at the missing persons poster, especially the photo of Roger Goodlett. Intrigued, Tony introduced himself to the man, who said his name was Brian Smart. Tony, a friend of Roger's, tried to get information about his friend's whereabouts, but Brian avoided the subject and ended up inviting Tony to his home, claiming that he lived on a property that he was preparing for new owners. Along the way, Tony realized they were heading to rural areas north of Indianapolis, where wealthy families lived on mansions and farms. When they arrived at their destination, it was dark, but Tony could see that the name of the property ended with farm. The house was a mansion with a covered indoor pool. Tony described the place as potentially pleasant, but in that context, It seemed macabre. The house, although luxurious, was full of scattered objects and had mannequins around the pool. Tony left Brian briefly to go to the bathroom, and when he returned, he noticed that the man seemed restless, deducing that he had taken cocaine. As they swam, Brian mentioned a trick involving a hose that was placed around the pool. According to him, strangling someone during sex would cause an adrenaline rush that would intensify the experience. Brian asked Tony to strangle him, laying down on the couch and showing him how to do it. At one point, they switched positions, and Brian began to apply force to Tony's neck, who pretended to faint. When he realized that Tony was unresponsive, Brian shook him hard. When Tony woke up, Brian, visibly irritated, said that he shouldn't do that because he had had accidents before. Tony asked if that was what had happened to Roger Goodlett, to which Brian simply smiled. Later, when Brian had fallen asleep, Tony explored the house, finding only children's toys and women's clothing in the rooms. His goal was to find out Brian's real name, but he found nothing revealing. When Brian woke up, Tony convinced him to take him back to the bar. As they said goodbye, Brian said he knew Tony was playing games and proposed meeting the following Wednesday. The problem was, Tony had no idea where the mansion was, only that it was outside of Marion County and had a sign with farms at the end. Vandegrift and his team waited at the bar on Wednesday, but Brian didn't show up. Luckily, Vandegrift was friends with Detective Mary Wilson, who specializes in sex crimes and missing persons cases. Wilson had been working on missing gay men in the area since 1990. Mary Wilson and Tony Harris scouted the area where Tony had been taken, but none of the mansions looked familiar to him. Meanwhile, police officers were assigned to monitor the bars frequented by the alleged criminal. Vandegrift, feeling that he could not fully trust the police to solve the case, sent his investigator Bill Isley to independently scour the northern suburbs. After a few days, Isley found a property in Westfield with a sign that ended in farms. He remembered that Tony had mentioned this detail and decided to investigate. Isley realized that the place matched Tony's description: large and seemingly abandoned. Since he could not enter the property without a warrant, he took some photos and discovered that the residence belonged to the Baumeister family. He showed the photos to Tony, who didn't recognize the place, saying it looked different than he remembered. As the investigation continued, Herbert showed signs of deterioration. He became increasingly demanding and abusive toward his employees, disappearing for hours at a time and returning smelling of alcohol. Due to mismanagement, the stores began to decline financially. Investigators noted that behavior like this is common in serial killers. The more unstable the criminal's mental condition, the more visible the mood and behavior changes become to family and friends. Herbert had long been pretending and hiding his activities, but the effort was wearing on him. After a year of unsuccessful investigations in identifying Brian Smart, a turning point finally occurred in the case. On August 29, 1995, Herbert Baumeister showed up at the gay bar that Tony Harris frequented. Tony immediately recognized the man he knew as Brian Smart. With surprising calm, he spoke to Herbert and managed to note the license plate of the truck as he drove away. The next morning, he gave the information to Detective Mary Wilson. The license plate was not registered to Brian Smart, but to Herbert Richard Baumeister, a resident of Westfield, Indiana, who owned the Fox Hollow Farms mansion where he lived with his wife and children. This information matched perfectly with Vandegrift's investigation, Tony's account, and the clues gathered by the police. After months of gathering evidence, Mary Wilson presented her investigation to Lieutenant Thomas Green. On November 1, 1995, the two officers visited Herbert's store and informed him that the police were investigating disappearances in the Indianapolis gay community and that he was a suspect. They requested permission to search his home, a request that Herbert immediately denied. Detective Mary then tried to approach Julie Baumeister, who also had the legal authority to allow a search of the property. Herbert had lied to his wife, saying that he was being wrongly accused of theft. Mary did not mince words and told Julie the real reason for the investigation. But Julie did not take kindly to the accusation that her husband was involved in murders and asked the police to stand down. Mary left her card with Julie in case she changed her mind. Tensions between the Baumeisters escalated, with Herbert becoming increasingly stressed and tense. This directly affected Julie, who later called Mary, but only to accuse her of making her life worse. Since Hamilton County was outside Detective Mary Wilson's jurisdiction, she was unable to issue a search warrant. The outcome of the investigation therefore depended indirectly on Julie Baumeister. The couple's financial situation deteriorated rapidly. The children's department canceled its contract with Save-A-Lot stores, which were on the verge of bankruptcy. Julie could no longer stand Herbert's constant paranoia and filed for divorce, beginning to question her husband's mental health. On June 23, 1996, Julie called her lawyer, telling him to contact Detective Mary Wilson. Taking advantage of Herbert's absence, who had gone with Eric to visit his mother, Julie finally told him about the bones her son had found 2 years earlier in the backyard. Mary wasted no time in going to the Baumeister home, accompanied by Tom Anderson of the county sheriff's office and Detective Jeff Marco. Both were skeptical, expecting to find only animal bones. There, they met Julie and her lawyer, who led them to the site of the discovery. Julie defended herself, claiming that she had believed Herbert's story about the bones being her father's medical material. Investigators examined the ground and found a charred fragment about a foot long. It soon became clear that all the stones scattered across the ground were, in fact, burnt fragments of human bones. Forensic anthropologist Stephen Naraki of Indiana University confirmed that the remains were human and that some had been recently burned. The next day, a police team cordoned off the area and began searching what turned out to be Herbert Baumeister's secret burial site. Soon, District Attorney Sonia Learkamp and more than a dozen detectives, plus Stephen Naraki and his assistants, were on the scene for a detailed scientific exhumation. Orange flags were placed at each new discovery, and within 30 minutes, there were nearly 100 markers on the ground. The team described the scene as worse than a massive natural disaster. Inside the house, the indoor pool was found exactly as Tony Harris had described. At the scene, they discovered a partially hidden camera, which police suspected had been used to record the strangulations. Julie was concerned for the safety of Eric, who was with Herbert. Prosecutor Sonia and the county judge ordered that the boy be removed from his father immediately. When the police showed up with the papers to collect the child, Herbert calmly handed him over, unaware that his secrets were being discovered at Fox Hollow Farm. One question that puzzled investigators was how Herbert managed to strangle, burn, and bury so many men without his family's knowledge. Julie explained that for several months, especially during the summer, she and her children would stay at the home of Herbert's widowed mother, who loved the company of her grandchildren. Investigators confirmed that the dates of these visits coincided with the dates of the victims' disappearances. In the first 2 days of the search, the team of 60 volunteers found more than 5,500 bones, allowing them to assemble 4 complete bodies. During the excavation, neighbors reported a ditch on the edge of the property where there might be more remains. The site was examined, and investigators found ribs, vertebrae, and other bones, along with cans of Herbert's favorite brand of beer. By the end of the exhumation, it was determined that over 140 bones had been found, belonging to 7 different men. The total victim count had risen to 11. In September of 1996, several bodies were identified as those of Roger Allen Goodlett, age 44, Stephen Ray Coley, age 26, Richard Hamilton, age 20, and Manuel Resendez, age 31. The remaining remains could not be identified and remain so to this day. Police began searching for Herbert Baumeister, who had disappeared from his mother's home. The first lead came from Brad Baumeister, Herbert's brother, who on June 29, 1996, called police to report that his brother had contacted him from Fenville, Michigan, asking for money, claiming to be on a business trip. After sending the money, Brad heard about the discoveries on his brother's farm on the news and contacted the authorities. Herbert managed to enter Canada and headed east along Lake Huron to Grand Bend. On July 3rd, he committed suicide by shooting himself in the head with a .357 Magnum. Herbert left a suicide note mentioning only his failed marriage and failed business, with no reference to the murders. His last written words were that he would eat a peanut butter sandwich before bed. It was later discovered that the day before his suicide, a Canadian police officer had stopped Herbert for sleeping in his car and noticed a stack of videotapes in his luggage. It is not known whether the tapes were recordings of the murders, but if they were, Herbert likely disposed of them before taking his own life. Early in the investigation, Detective Vandegrift had linked the disappearances of the Indianapolis gay men to the gay men found strangled to death on Interstate 70 in Ohio. When he shared his suspicions with Greene County, Ohio, District Attorney David Michael Fornshell, they both agreed that there were significant similarities between the crimes. The last murder attributed to the Interstate 70 strangler had occurred in 1990, just as the Indianapolis disappearances began. In 1982, an 8-person task force was created in Indianapolis to investigate the murders of Gary Davies, age 25, Dennis Boots, age 27, and John Roan, age 21, all homosexuals who frequented gay bars and were killed between August 1981 and May 1983. The FBI joined the investigation in 1983, suggesting that 2 separate killers were at work. According to the agency, the first 3 men were not victims of the Interstate 70 strangler. The profile of the first killer would be that of a white man, between 20 and 30 years old, with a low-skilled job, a healthy lifestyle, extremely conservative in public but secretly homosexual, committing crimes motivated by shame and self-hatred. The profile of the Interstate 70 strangler was described as a white male in his 40s, with a well-paying job and respected in the community, possibly married but without sexual relations with his wife due to his attraction to men, resulting in guilt and shame that eventually destroyed his career and manifested itself in lethal hatred. In 1982, Herbert Baumeister was approximately 35 years old, and his other characteristics matched the FBI profile. David Fornshell, upon learning of the findings at Fox Hollow Farms, discovered that Herbert had made numerous business trips to Ohio during the late 1980s. Julie Baumeister confirmed this information to the prosecutor. Further investigation of credit card receipts, phone records, and Herbert's vehicle reinforced the suspicions. Most disturbing was the similarity between Herbert's photo and a sketch that Ohio police had drawn up based on witness statements at the time. With the case reopened, a witness identified Herbert as the man who had driven his friend Michael Riley home for the night in 1988. Michael was found dead the next day. Shortly thereafter, at a press conference, representatives from Ohio and Indiana counties officially linked Herbert Baumeister to the Interstate 70 strangler. There are still skeptics who question this conclusion, but the fact is that the murders attributed to the strangler stopped precisely when Herbert purchased Fox Hollow Farm, where he had his own space to hide the bodies. Detective Vandegrift also mentioned that Herbert's brother Richard Baumeister was found dead in a hot tub in Texas, around the same time Herbert was committing the stranglings in his pool. This connection, however, has never been proven. It is estimated that Herbert Baumeister claimed approximately 27 victims between 1980 and 1996. Many families in Ohio have finally learned the face of their loved one's killer, but unfortunately, many of the bodies found at Fox Hollow Farm have never been identified, leaving other families in Indianapolis without answers. Did you like this true crime story? Leave a like and a comment suggesting which case you would like to see covered in future videos. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories and share with your friends. Your interaction is essential for us to continue bringing you content like this.